Welcome everyone to the Eastside Freedom Library and our program this evening on the challenges being faced by the United States Postal Service and the ways that workers and unions are both being threatened by those challenges and are developing strategies and projects to confront those challenges. The Eastside Freedom Library is now 6 years old. Our mission is to inspire solidarity, work for justice, and advocate for equality for all. And we are in partnership with many unions, and among our best and most appreciated partners have been locals of the American Postal Workers Union and the National Association of Letter Carriers. We're delighted to be working with them. And we think that this is a great opportunity in the midst of this pandemic and this crisis, an opportunity to become more aware of what's going on in the Postal Service. I also like to say that at the Eastside Freedom Library, we really value what a friend called present tense knowledge, the knowledge that people have based on their daily work experiences. And that's a knowledge that people outside that arena typically don't have. We're in a moment where there's a lot of talk about the importance of science and scientists. But at the Eastside Freedom Library, we also believe that this is a moment when it's very important to listen to workers and the knowledge that workers have about how their work is organized and how it can be made safer, more efficient, more productive, more humane, both for the people who do it and the people who rely on it. So with the help of my old friend Greg Poferl and my good friend Kathy Hansen, we've assembled this panel today to talk about what is the challenge being faced by the Postal Service and what are workers and unions doing about it. So I want to introduce our panelists. So Kathy Hansen, whom I've mentioned, has been the editor for the Minneapolis area local of the American Postal Workers Union since 2002, a job that she obviously loves so much that she's even continued it after her retirement 2 years ago. And Kathy had worked in the clerk craft before retiring. We're also going to hear from David Yao, who's come all the way from Seattle by way of the internet. David is the lead clerk at the Bitter Lake Station in Seattle, and he served many years as a steward and legislative activist. I've known David for many years from his presence at labor notes conferences. He's been a very important voice for postal workers across the country. We're also being joined by Todd Elferton, who's the president of the St. Paul area local of the postal workers. Todd has been a mail processing clerk in the letter automation section. I'm sure he has particular insights about the technologies that are being used and the technologies that have been dismantled in the mail processing work of the Postal Service. And he's been president of the APW local for the last 10 years. Samantha Hartwig is the president of the Minneapolis branch of the National Association of Letter Carriers. She's worked for the Postal Service for the past 17 years as a city letter carrier in Minneapolis. And for the past 2 years, she's been the full-time president for the Letter Carriers branch. And then we have Tony Winkles, not to be confused with the name Cindy that is showing up under his smiling face. Tony is a steward in the Minneapolis local of the Letter Carriers. He's worked as a letter carrier for the past 17 years and has long been a steward at the University Station in the Minneapolis system. So I want to start by asking, what do you think is important about the United States Postal Service? And what would you like people watching this conversation to have an increased appreciation of? about the value of the Postal Service in the United States. Let me start with Todd, please.
Good morning. My name is Todd Elferton. That's a great question. The Postal Service, by its mission, is required to deliver to every household within the United States. And it was designed on the mission back before we even became a country to bind a country together and allow us to communicate. Now, over the years, it's transformed itself and done a lot of movement to maintain that mission, but we still try to do that to this day. We've become kind of the center for a supply chain in the United States that carries a whole lot of products to, shall we say, unprofitable areas in the United States for big companies. So as that has happened, we've made agreements with U.P.S. and agreements with DHL, FedEx, and even Amazon, where we carry a significant portion of those packages to the front doors of those people. So that includes prescriptions and what they need to make a living. Even small business owners use the mail service to get parts or merchandise that they can sell in their small local communities. So the Postal Service is a lifeblood within the country that connects us all together. And because of our universal service obligation, we've kind of used that to distribute a whole bunch of other stuff. And the public's become really reliant on that.
Great, thank you, Todd. Does someone want to talk about the importance of the Postal Service as an employer in the United States, and I think particularly for workers of color, veterans? How do you see the Postal Service as an employer? Kathy, please.
Well, I'm a retired postal employee, so I spent 34 and a half years there. And the importance of my employment to me meant a decent place to live. I was able to pay all my bills. I raised 3 kids, bought houses. You know, all those things I did because I knew I had a good paycheck coming. I knew I had good benefits if something happened to us. It changed my life to work for the Postal Service.
Great, thank you. Someone else on the Postal Service as an employer? Samantha,
Right.
please.
Yeah, the thing with the Postal Service, and being it's in the Constitution, it's a service, it's been around for almost 250 years. It's an employer for all demographics of people. It doesn't matter where you come from or who you are. You have an opportunity at a good working class job, a job that, as Kathy had said, you can raise a family on this job. You can buy a house on this job. When I started, I was a single mom, so I was able to take care of my son. He's 20 years old now, but that's a large part due to this job. This job is also employs almost 100,000 military vets. It's a great job for a lot of people of color. And some of my friends that are people of color have said if it wasn't for this job, they don't know what they would do. This was really their only opportunity to have a good income and have a good life. And it really is America's Postal Service. It's a job that anybody, just about anybody, could have if they want it. It's there. And if you were to defund the Postal Service or privatize it, those good wages could go away. The opportunity for many people would go away. One of the things with the Postal Service, it's consistent employment. So in times of recession, this is a job that a lot of people will flock to when people get laid off. Well, the Postal Service is job security for a lot of people. So it's a good place for a lot of people.
Thank you. David, you wanted to say something too?
Well, just on the previous 2 speakers, it's really important that people understand that in an era of declining wages and finishing opportunities as manufacturing jobs were shipped overseas, Postal Service has continued to be a place employment for living wage job. It's also a place that has equal employment in terms of hiring, in terms of pay. So, for example, women make around 65 cents per dollar when men earn. The Postal Service is 100% dollar because those jobs are based on seniority and based on bidding. And we have, in the era of Black Lives Matter movement, 23% of the Postal Service's workforce is African American, which is a far higher percentage in the regular workforce. It's a place where it's not who you know, but it's what you know. You can pass the test, pass the interview. And because of fair employment, many people who would not otherwise have a job have a decent job that pays a living wage and has good benefits.
Thank you. Tony, did you want in on that?
I certainly agree with all the comments that the panelists have made. I do want to point out that Kathy Hansen is in fact an Air Force vet as well, so living proof that there is life after military service in the post office. There are fewer and fewer vets at the post office, but it's still an important source of employment for so many people other than vets. So I came to the post office relatively late in life. And I tell people I've worked a lot of jobs before I came to the post office, but most days on the job at the post office doesn't feel like work to me. It's once you're on the street delivering the mail, you're your own boss. And it's nice to be able to take care of the customer service needs that pretty much all carriers understand and relish. So it's a great job. I would recommend it to anybody.
Thank you. I wanted to just add, when I first moved to Minnesota in the early 1980s, I was at a Black community educational event, and an elder in the Black community said that in Minneapolis in particular, African Americans would refer to the post office as the university. And the reason was there were 7 African American PhDs working in the Minneapolis post office, which says a lot about the lack of opportunity in other sectors. And I think, as Samantha has said, were the Postal Service to be privatized, some of the kinds of opportunities as well as the level of compensation might well go down. But that the Postal Service had a pride of place in the African American community because of these 7 PhDs who clearly had respect in the wider community at the same time. There's a great book that some of you may know by Phil Rubio, who was a postal worker for many years, called There's Always Work at the Post Office. And it's a book about African American postal workers and how when other doors were closed, the Postal Service was a place where workers of color could find employment. So I want to shift and ask, what do you think about what's the challenges that are coming fast and furious at the Postal Service, particularly from the administration in Washington, from the new Postmaster General, the ways that the Postal Service is being talked about, threatened, challenges of cutting funding. And I know, Todd, you have some things to say about even equipment having been moved out of local facilities.
Well, let me first back up.
Yeah.
I think our biggest challenge, honestly, is our president of the United States is the first president that convened a postal commission that recommended outright privatization of the Postal Service. So we know what the agenda is. Clearly, they want to move the Postal Service away from being a public post office and move it into the corporate world. So, I mean, that's the biggest threat that we've seen as postal workers in a long, long time. I mean, so that from that standpoint, now, if you want to talk to me about the machines, the facility that I represent, the processing plant in St. Paul, we started out at the outset of before this present Postmaster General was appointed, we had 32 machines in our facility. And within a few weeks of them, we got notified that they were going to eliminate 2 letter machines and a flat sorting machine. And that's been kind of something that we've been notified on over periods of time over the last 10 years, I would say. And what they do is they do something called tarping a machine, or that's how they used to do it. So what they say is, we're going to shut this machine off for a period of time and see if we can process the mail that comes through this facility without this machine. And then sometimes that machine gets turned back on because they aren't able to do it, and sometimes it gets removed. I would say since 2010, they had removed about 3 machines, and the 4th one was just being tarped. So fast forward to the last month, and well, now the Postmaster General says they aren't his plans, and he doesn't know who gave them, but it's one of those deals. They went into what I call a really fast mode to disassemble machines. And they were able to disassemble 7 out of my facility that in about a 3-week period. And that's what we're struggling with. We're going to be struggling once the mail volume of fall picks up. We're kind of in the summer slow time, and the school not really starting up like it normally does. I think we're going to slowly hit, but election time's coming, political mail's coming, and these volumes are going to present a challenge for us. But I tell everybody the mathematics of this, and people don't really understand these. These machines are expected to run 20 hours a day, and they run about 25,000 pieces an hour. That's their expectation, up to 30. So I tell everybody a reduction of 10 machines in the St. Paul processing plant is a reduction of 5 million letters that they have the ability to process. So the actions of the present Postmaster General and what they're doing is going to significantly impact mail service. And I anticipate it's going to slow it down. We haven't seen large scale in our area yet slowdowns, but there's been reports in other parts of this United States where the letter mail has really slowed down significantly.
Thank you. David, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I think those challenges are pretty clear, and they've been high profile in the press. We've got a Postmaster General who was a political appointee. He was a CEO for businesses that have a long history of being cited for various violations of labor law, health and safety issues, employment discrimination, misclassifying workers as contractors in order to underpay them. And then he comes in and he makes all these sudden moves that have this drastic effect on Postal Service. We get complaints, we get high-profile newspaper articles that could have the effect of undermining the high faith of the public in the Postal Service. The Postal Service has 91% favorability ratings. It's been extremely, it's very trusted by the public, and this has the effect of undermining confidence in the Postal Service. So even though the Postmaster General has said he's going to put a freeze but not reverse some of the changes that he's made, we're worried that beyond November, when all the worry about mail-in ballots has sort of dissipated somewhat, beyond November, he'll plan to implement these drastic cuts to the Postal Service that reduce service. The Postal Service is a service. It's not the United States postal business, as has been said before, and we're there to serve the American people. And so his mission appears to be something different, he wants to come in and slash jobs, slash service, and a lot of the moves he makes don't make any sense. For example, after machine removal, in some areas, they don't have the capacity, and the machines are gone. And so I just was communicating with a coworker, and she's telling me she's working up to 12 hours a day since they took the machines out. They're paying overtime, they're paying a lot of extra money because of these so-called efficiency moves. So we have a challenge with a new Postmaster General who's never worked for the Postal Service. He shows he doesn't even know how much the rates are for mailing various pieces of mail. That was in his congressional testimony. So we've got a boss who seems hell-bent on changing what was once a great service into something different, and it's really our job to try and defend that. Very difficult with the current administration we have that appointed him, and very difficult with a board of governors who've chosen him, and they'll be very difficult to dislodge. We've got our work cut out for us.
Thank you. What about it seems to me that there's this terrible intersection of the economic agenda of pushing towards privatization and the political agenda, particularly in this election season, of raising questions with the public about relying on mail-in ballots in this moment of a pandemic, where many of us, we've seen what happened in Wisconsin, we saw what happened in Georgia, long lines of people trying to vote, being fearful of contracting the virus, people probably choosing not to vote at all, rather than risk getting ill, an illness that might kill them. So we seem to have an economic agenda and a political agenda. What's your sense of, and what are postal workers talking about these threats, and how are you talking to your neighbors and your families and other people in the community about the, as David has said, the trust that people have in the Postal Service and the ways that these moves are undermining or intended to undermine that trust?
Okay. Oh, okay.
Please, Samantha.
Yeah. So it's kind of a lot of stuff, what you were just saying, a lot of different pieces to the puzzle. It's
Yes.
not just one little thing. And the first thing that the public needs to know is that right now we have the infrastructure and the capability to handle mail-in balloting. The Postal Service has special procedures put in place to treat a ballot as though it was a priority piece of mail. Here in Minneapolis during the primaries, we had high-level management actually driving ballots to where they needed to get to make sure that everybody's ballot got to the polling place on time to be counted, to be part of the primary. And that is going to continue in through this election season. So that's the first piece of the puzzle. But the second piece of the puzzle really revolves around legislation, because what we have is more people wanting absentee ballots to mail in vote. Well, local and state governments may not have the resources to accommodate the influx of mail-in balloting. So one of the things we need is legislation to help fund that with state and local governments, and to make sure that nobody ever has to put a stamp on a mail-in ballot, because that would, I consider that a poll tax. Nobody should have to pay a poll tax to vote. It's the American public's right. It's so much easier. So we have to have legislation to help out state and local communities. In addition, legislation for the Postal Service to help through the COVID pandemic, because we're at where we're at with our finances going back to 2006, when Congress passed the Postal Enhancement and Accountability Act, requiring us to pre-fund future retiree health benefits for 75 years, that no other company in America does. Congress doesn't do it. It really was an unfair burden. And then that brought us to 2008 under the Great Recession, when the housing market crashed. And so fewer people were mailing. That hurt, but we were still required to pay in to that pre-funding mandate. And now under COVID-19, a lot of people working from home, you know, as we're doing here, more electronic use of meetings, of communication, and that is starting to hurt the Postal Service. But that pre-funding mandate is still there. That has not changed. That hasn't been fixed. There's legislation that has passed the House that is currently held up in the Senate. So the one thing that we've been asking people to do is to talk to your family and friends and talk to your senators. Here in Minnesota, Amy Klobuchar and Tina Smith are on board with supporting all that legislation in the Senate. And that's great, that's great. Now we need our family and friends who live outside of Minnesota to talk to their senators and their family and their friends and ask them to help out with everything. Sorry.
Thank you. So I recently read somewhere that in Seattle, postal workers had reinstalled equipment that had been ordered removed. David, is there anything that you can tell us about that?
Yes, I can actually. So some of the press articles portrayed it as acts of postal defiance. it's a little more complicated than that. My theory on that, on why in Washington State, in certain installations, they did not actually go through, or they reversed some of these, some of the dismantling of the machinery. It may have something to do with a lawsuit that was filed by the state's attorney general, led by the attorney general of Washington State, who is very concerned about the election coming up and the ability of people to vote. And so, to me, that's the only reason that I can see why that happened. The very day that the lawsuit by Washington State and 13 other states was announced, the Postal Service announced that they were going to put a freeze on all the changes. And I talked to the folks who work at the installations where the machines were put back online. Some of it was kind of a happy accident. They never connected it because somebody was on vacation or something. They never disconnected, and so that machinery stayed up. So it was more than just a few pieces of machinery. It was actually a whole operation. It was going to be consolidated from 3 offices into, we were going to have only 2 offices that did this basic processing of raw mail you drop in a mailbox. And so mail would have to travel a long way, and it could delay the mail. Rural areas, if they did not get their mail onto a truck, and famously, the Postmaster General is saying the trucks must run on time, even if there's no mail on them, which is happening a lot, then rural areas would have their ballots delayed. They would not be able to get their vote in, perhaps not on time, if they mailed it really late. So our Attorney General filed this lawsuit, and it appears to have a chilling effect on postal management. But after the election, you know, the spotlight will be off, and we're going to have elections every year. This is not our last election.
Thank you. I wonder, as I was saying earlier, that the public often doesn't know what work is really like. And, you know, we've heard Tony say that the work of a letter carrier feels pretty free, out on the street, being your own boss. I wonder, Kathy, you were in the clerk craft for a long time. If you could say a bit about what the work is actually like, the people who are indeed sorting the mail.
Well, I might not be the best person to ask because I didn't even touch any mail for 23 years. I worked in an office, and you know, I had a lot of contact with the people on the floor, but I didn't actually, I wasn't out there.
Okay. Let me see, Todd, can you say something about what the mail processing work is actually like?
Sure. Mail processing has become very automated, mechanized. The letter machines that I was talking about previously are machines that start at a high speed, and they're expanding them presently to 302 separations. So these machines are probably now in the neighborhood of 40 yards long, in which these letters are sorted into individual separations. That one person is responsible for making sure that those stay clear, because when you're full, you got to slide them into a mail tray and box, and then you have one person feeding those machines. So in an 8-hour shift, that's a lot of physical labor. When you think about, you know, if it's going to process, you know, 200,000 pieces or 250,000 pieces in an 8-hour shift, and a tray of mail has 500 letters in it, think about the number of letter trays that a person is repetitively picking up and moving over the course of a night, over the course of a week, over the course of a month and a year. So it's a very physical job. It's very demanding as far as, you know, we see injuries in rotator cuffs, lower back stuff. So yeah, it's once it gets on those machines and starts running, you're required to keep that machine running without stopping. So the person loading it has to pick up those trays and load them into it, and the person on the other end has to keep the machine from shutting off because there's a full mail bin. So I mean, that's kind of in a nutshell what a mail processor does. And then they have, you know, they have flat machines that are the same thing, that process business mail and magazines, and package machines that, you know, sort at a high level. And, you know, we're required to make sure those machines don't shut off during those shifts. So it is very labor intensive, and we move a lot of mail through these processing plants every night.
Thank you. David, you wanted to add to that?
I just wanted to talk about the experience of our clerks who work in retail and who meet with the public every day during the era of the pandemic. When things started out, people were very freaked out, and there was a lot of concern because there wasn't adequate protective gear. People didn't have masks or hand sanitizers or didn't know exactly how to handle the situation. Right now, things have sort of stabilized where we do have masks. Customers in my state are required to wear masks, although there's been some incidents in our state where people have reacted violently when asked to wear masks. We've learned more about the COVID and the fact that it's the air you breathe that's really the big risk. And it does make things much more stressful to come to work and to have to maintain social distancing, to worry about customers who don't. We have plexiglass barriers, we call them spit shields, between us and the customers, but they're not solid wall. People peek around because we can't understand what they're saying. It's so hard to communicate with the mask on and the barrier between you and a lot of elderly customers. So we have problems communicating. People will peek around the barriers, pull their mask down so they can explain what they were saying, and then we're sort of not in a safe situation. So it's been very stressful on people. Some people have taken some leave off. We had somebody test positive in my building. Fortunately, only one person had to be quarantined out of that. So people are somewhat taking for granted the essential workers that they were so much appreciating when the pandemic first started, but the risks have not gone away. And we have a lot of people in our workforce who are either elderly or somebody in their household is elderly or compromised in their health. So the pandemic has definitely made the job more difficult. We've not got any hazard pay. We're there working long hours because there's a much higher demand for postal services now during the pandemic as people are shipping face masks, hand sanitizer, or they're mailing hard to find items to their loved ones who don't want to leave the house, or people are selling more things or buying more things online. People are selling things because they're unemployed and they want to make money. So we're definitely a busier place, and we have these risks we have to deal with on a daily basis that weren't there before. They add a layer of difficulty and danger to our job that we didn't have. That maybe the worst thing that comes out of that is really the stress.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Tony, can you say a bit about your relationships with the people that you deliver mail to, and also how people, I'm sure, rely on you, and
Sure.
And the Letter Carriers Project, the food drives, and
Sure.
you're a very important interface with community.
Well, my particular position as a city letter carrier is called an RR, regular relief. So I don't actually have my own route, which means I get a vast amount of variety filling in for people when they're sick or they're on vacation. And as a result, I meet a lot of people, and they might not see me on a route for 6 or 7 months. And then it's like a high school reunion. How are you? How are the kids? Actually, an elderly woman on one of my routes who had heard that I was sick, not true, called me up and left a voicemail. I didn't get back to her for a couple days, got in touch with her. Everything's fine. She's fine. And she said, I'm going to call my kids and let them know that I heard from Tony and he's okay. So we're integrated into the community. Carriers assist people. Carriers do all those intangibles that are more than selling stamps. And I know regulars who've been on the same route for years and years and years see people grow up. They see people get married. They bury parents. I mean, we're a little bit of everything. A lot of carriers are made crazy by the food drive because it's a lot of extra work, but the vast majority of people, if not look forward to it, are more than willing to do the extra work because we know it's important and it's just part of the deal. You know, it's you know when it is. It's Mother's Day in May, and if you don't want to do it, I know plenty of guys who will bid that as their annual leave, so they don't have to. But again, we know that we are more than stamps. We are service on so many levels, and that's one of the nice things about it. It's one of the challenging things. And just as far as the trust in the post office, my neighbors all know I'm a letter carrier. They see me coming and going in uniform, and I'll be sitting on the boulevard drinking a beer out of uniform, pulling weeds, And they'll come and ask me about the ballots.
Mhm.
And many of them for Hennepin County come through my home station. So I say, we've got a guy physically delivering them. They have a PO box here too. So you should see the number of ballots that come through.
Mm.
And that type of mail in particular, pre-addressed, barcode on it, I said, we can handle that all day long. That's as easy as it gets. It's when we're at our most efficient. So if we're permitted to do the job, if the clerks on the other side have the equipment they need, you have no reason to worry about mail-in balloting at all. And they don't know me except as the guy who lives on the corner. And they take my word for it just because people trust us because of what we do. We handle your stuff all the time. We don't keep it, we give it to you. We do everything we can to get it to you. So there's a trust that is an important bond between the Postal Service and our customers and our communities.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Samantha, is there anything you want to add about letter carriers' interaction with the people on their routes?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And letter carriers, and we do more than just deliver the mail, like Tony was saying. The food drive, the largest one-day food drive in the nation, second Saturday in May. Letter carriers across the country. We raise money for muscular dystrophy. That's our charity of choice with the NALC. We also know when something's not right in your neighborhood. Letter carriers save lives every day. They've been known to save people from burning houses or help out when there's been a burglary, or they know when somebody hasn't emptied their mailbox, which is unusual, and maybe they know about that person's medical condition and they can check on that person. They're always saving lives and we're out there every day. One other thing that hasn't really been mentioned because I don't know that it's been promoted. One of the things back in 2001 after the anthrax scare in the Postal Service, there was a program created called the City Readiness Initiative, and Minneapolis was a test site for this program, in which they picked a Sunday and they did a mock drill where letter carriers went every house in one day and delivered an antidote to every house in the area, and that was a success. That is one thing that the Postal Service, if we ever get to that point in a pandemic, the Postal Service could get that done in one day. Every house in America, an antidote if we were to have a similar situation, and it just almost feels like with this pandemic, we're moving that way. But this was a successful test, and it worked. And it worked, I believe, is in 7 other cities tested it also. So the Postal Service is so much more than just delivering the mail. It's a part of the community. We're a part of small businesses. We're a part of America's everyday lives, which brings us back to the service part of the Postal Service. So we are ingrained and we're there and we just want to do our job and get the mail delivered and do it efficiently. And these recent hurry up changes that they've been trying to push through have hurt some of that. I have seen mail delays. When I was delivering mail, I've had customers who had prescription medications. Oh, I'm so glad you came today. Today I'm on my last day of medication. And even if those packages are delayed one day, maybe that's somebody's medication in there that should have arrived today on their last day, but it'll show up tomorrow, and that might be a problem for somebody. So we just want to do our job.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I want to tackle a slightly different issue, and that is what does it mean to work union? What does it mean to have a union? Today, less than 10% of workers in the United States are in unions. There was a time when the numbers started to decline where I thought as a labor historian and an outsider that at least there was enough presence still that the next generation was hearing about unions at the breakfast table or the dinner table. Now the numbers have dropped even further, makes those kinds of conversations less likely that they're going on. So for the 90% of the people, let's say, who are watching this conversation, who are not working in unions, many of you're not only postal workers or retired or postal workers who've become full-time union officials, all of you are involved with unions. What does it mean to work union? What does it mean to have union representation on the job? Some of you are stewards or have been stewards. I want to talk a little bit with you about what it means internally for workers who are represented. And then I want to talk a little bit about what it means externally. How are the unions a voice in seeking the kind of legislation Samantha has talked about, or the kinds of programs that David has talked about, getting the Attorney General to act and so on. So what does it mean internally if you're a postal worker to be working in a unionized setting? Who would like to start that? Tony, please.
I've been steward at my station for going on 6 years now. And it means that you're under pressure from both sides, both from the craft employees and from management. Obviously, there's always going to be a certain amount of conflict on the workroom floor, even between craft employees. And if, say, somebody's attendance is less than stellar and people are being forced to work overtime as a result, and it seems to be an ongoing issue, you kind of get hit from both sides. Management wants to bring discipline. Carriers want you to bring discipline, but it's a matter of making sure that our contract, and I really stress this whenever I get the chance, the contract was agreed to by two sides. It's our contract, and we need to follow that contract. It needs to be enforced equitably to all the terms of it and all the conditions of it. And sometimes that's unfortunate for one side or the other, but it's a contract and it's agreed to. But it also means that you have protection, that management can't single somebody out simply because they don't like them, or they think their performance isn't up to standards, whatever that standard may be. And the union provides that protection, that you're not going to be singled out, that things are processed and approached appropriately, and that there can be a resolution to conflict, either on the workroom floor or through the conflict, or through the contract. So I think people take it for granted who are already in the union and work in a union environment. It always is a little bit frustrating for me to talk to friends who are non-union members or don't have the opportunity to be represented. And I'll say, well, why? How can you get a grievance resolved when somebody gets paid for doing X, Y, and Z? And I said, because it's a contract and it's been violated. And it's not that people are looking to get payments. It's just that it's the agreement that was, that both sides came to. So it's not a matter of I'm looking to get free money for people, or I'm digging for free money or gold. That's not the way it works. It's just that's the resolution to a situation sometimes. So that's my take on being a union steward.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes. Someone else want to talk about what it is to work union in the post office? Kathy, please.
Well, I was impressed by the union's fairness. We had a lot of people that needed to be represented more often than others, maybe. I thought that the representation was fair. It wasn't management attacking somebody for doing something. What I want to say there, that might not be appropriate. I just always depended on the union to set that medium point where you have a point and you have a point, and let's bring it together and talk about it and solve the problem. You know, there's two sides to every story. And I think having the union steward listening, mediating, I think it works. I don't know what else to say about that.
Great, thank you. Todd, please.
Well, thank you. To me, I just want to go back to the core. I think unionism at its best is a relational aspect in which a worker does not have to face the work environment by themselves. And I try to tell everybody that, you know, we negotiate rules and we get involved in safety. And if we have an employee that's struggling with, and I'm going to use an example, I have a Eastern African person I represent, and something's happening back at home and they need to get back home because their mom's dying. And we need to get in front of management and say we need to do the right thing for this person to work kind of a win-win situation out. But at its core is that you don't have to do this alone in the work area. Mm-hmm. And that comes from, you know, anything, you know, if you got an employer that's coming after you for discipline, you know, you have somebody there that steps up and you know, enforces this just cause principle and making sure management does it all in the right fashion. If management's playing favoritism with overtime, we get involved and work through all these processes. In a workforce without a union, you don't have that ability to go to somebody and get that help, and that's an issue in a lot of workplaces. And that's where I go back. We got to get back to our core. This is at its core relational, that you don't have to do this alone, and that we're better together.
Great, thank you. Samantha, you wanted to say something too.
Yeah, definitely. And being in the union, I mean, it's more than just the contractual stuff that everybody's been referring to. It's one of the things I spend a lot of time, in addition to training stewards and how to handle grievances, but I also spend a lot of time assisting letter carriers who got injured on the job through federal workers' comp. Federal workers' comp is difficult to go through by yourself, and you know, they're not alone. Like Todd said, you're not alone. And so that's important too, just being there to help people out. One of the things, this is many years ago when I was a steward in Minneapolis over Northeast, we had a carrier and he was getting married. It was his wedding day, and management did not want to let him have the day off to attend his own wedding. It was ridiculous. So the carriers in the station, we all banded together and we said, management, don't worry about it. We got this. We'll do this. And that's what it's about, togetherness. And if everybody comes together, because the union isn't just me or any one person on this call, it's all of us in the union. And if all of us participate, because it is, you know, a participant activity, you know, if everybody participates, we're stronger together. Our voices could be heard. And even in the climate we're in now with the unions, we're going out. I'm always doing media interviews lately with everything that's going on with the Postal Service. We're speaking out about what's going on, trying to protect our employer. So we work with our employer too to try and make things better. But it's so much more than just the contractual stuff that everybody's used to. And typically a union shop, you're going to have those higher wages. And you might not get that somewhere else. Like Amazon workers, you know, they're not making what we're making to deliver mail and packages. I know that for a fact. And if they were able to be unionized, they could probably get a higher wage for sure. But yeah, it's just, there's so many more benefits to being in a union. And I think part of the problem today, in today's society, a lot of what I hear, well, we don't need unions anymore. We already have better pay. We already have all this stuff. Unions are obsolete. And they're not obsolete. It's just a lot of people don't take the time to really sit down and learn about what it is to be in a union and what a union can do for you. I think in today's climate, unions are needed more than ever now. And we just want to educate the people that there's so much more to it.
Thank you. So let's shift slightly and talk about how the union and you are communicating with legislators, your neighbors, your families. What is the message that you're trying to communicate about how to get the Postal Service through this crisis that you're facing, we're all facing together, given where we started with the idea of how important the Postal Service is to our lives in the United States? How is the union giving you a voice or giving postal workers a voice and what's the message that is being communicated or you want to see being heard by the public in this crisis that we're in? Who would like to start? Kathy, please.
Well, I talk to my family and my friends a lot about the post office and what they need to do. Call the senators, support the bills and the amendments. And what I did was I made a little card that has the senator's name and phone number on it, and the districts right around Minneapolis where it's pertinent to me. And I give them to my friends. And, you know, if they call, good. But at least when I give them the card and tell them what it's for, I hope they make the call. Some of them have.
Great. Somebody else? David, please.
Yeah, well, there's been a whole effort to mobilize the public in defense of the Postal Service, in defense of a public Postal Service, by the way. There were, on 2 days in August, separate coalitions had really large sets of rallies all across the country. On one Saturday, there were 800 rallies across the country in defense of the Postal Service to try and oppose any administration or plans to kneecap the Postal Service in the face of an election. And I think that was, I've heard it said that was the largest set of rallies in defense of the Postal Service ever in our country. The following Tuesday, there was another set of rallies that the American Postal Workers Union initiated. And of course, they have the Grand Alliance to Save the Postal Service, of which they're a leading member, which is over 100 different organizations, both national and local, that try and defend the public postal service. So those were very, I think, effective ways of making very public the problems and the solutions we're aiming towards. Of course, funding for the Postal Service is a key issue, and putting pressure on Congress, especially the Senate, to fund the Postal Service adequately. The Postal Service has lost a lot of money because of the pandemic, and big corporations have gotten relief. The airline industry has gotten over $50 billion in COVID relief, and they don't visit everybody's house 6 times a week like the Postal Service does. So unfortunately, the current administration has blocked funding, but because of the public pressure, it seems like there's a possibility that we may get pandemic funding. There's things that have to be done to move the Postal Service forward. Our Postmaster General has a vision, which I'm afraid will be slashing and downsizing and hurting service. What we want is to maintain the service and to have the kind of sources of funding and to take away some of the prohibitive rules that Congress enacted back in 2006 that have hurt postal finances, which are, of course, a big topic of conversation.
Thank you. And anyone else on the message that you want people to hear? Well, yes, Samantha, please.
Just really kind of piggyback off of David. Everything he said is absolutely correct. We need to get the pressure on the Senate to get the bills through the Senate and to get support for us. I mean, it's there. We're watching everybody else getting assistance during COVID and getting bailed out. And we've had all these rallies. And actually here in Minneapolis, I'm going to put in a little plug, but in Minneapolis on September 13th, the letter carriers here, we're going to put on our own rally in front of the main post office, downtown Minneapolis, 100 South 1st Street at 1 p.m. And rallies, getting our voice heard, making sure people can hear us, face masks required. But that's the thing, getting out there, getting our message out. If we stay silent, we're gonna lose out big time, and now's not the time to go quiet.
Great, thank you. So that is September 13th, 1 p.m. at the Minneapolis Maine Postal Service. Mask required.
Mask required.
Yes.
We're making up 100 signs for it, so we can use the public's help in a big way for that. Great. Absolutely.
Great. So wrapping this up, I want to encourage people who are watching that you can type in questions and comments on the Facebook page or the YouTube page that we can respond to. I want to encourage you to show up for the letter carriers rally in Minneapolis on the 13th. The next time you see your letter carrier, show her or him some love. The next time you're in a postal facility buying stamps, or don't pull down your mask and try to crane your neck around the plexiglass. Respect the safety and thank your clerks. And the next time that you get something in the mail that matters to you, or that you mail something that matters to you, think about how it gets to your house or from your house to where it's going. And actually, I'm going to end with an anecdote that a week ago, a dear friend of mine who lives in North Minneapolis was interviewed on MinPost newspaper online about his work in his retirement as a photographer and a poet. And he mentioned that he had just published a book of his photographs. And so I sent him an email and I said, hey, Bill, this is really great that you've published the book. Really great interview with you. The Eastside Freedom Library would like a copy of your book. And he emailed me back. We know how instantaneous email can be. And he said, I'll send you a book. The next day, the book showed up here at the library. And I emailed him back and I said, all praise to the Postal Service that we were able to get a book in a day. I mean, it was sent media mail. And those of us who send books or receive books tend to think, well, maybe media mail is on the back seat. It's the last thing that's going to show up. Holy mackerel, it got here in a day. And that felt magical and so valuable. So, and again, I want to emphasize how important it is that postal workers are in a union, or are in multiple unions, and that those unions work together. But workers have representation on the job. I think our speakers have really emphasized the values and the relationships that are central to this. It's not just a transactional situation. So I want to thank Greg, who's not with us because he's just had knee surgery. Greg, who's helped pull this together. Kathy, for helping to pull this together. Todd, Samantha, presidents of local organizations. Tony, a steward. David Yao, coming all the way in from Seattle magically by the internet. Thank you all for taking up some of your time to listen and watch. We look forward to your comments and questions. If you're not already on the mailing list, the email list for the Eastside Freedom Library, you can sign on via our website. Go to the Get Involved header and send us your email address so that we can stay in touch with you. Remember how important it is to inspire solidarity, work for justice, and advocate for equity for all. Thank you all, and good evening.